not a single entrepreneur on the planet that has ever not failed, because that's the only way that you learn and grow. And they can be small micro failures, or they can be big, catastrophic, massive failures. And you learn from those, in very different ways. And so I think that's part of the process and part of the journey is just you have to go through and fail, succeed. And it's those success points that drive you forward, because it's like, oh, I finally figured things out.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, make sure to do yourself one teeny tiny little favor and make sure to give us a follow, because I don't want you to miss out on any of the amazing guests that I have coming on. Without further ado, let's get right into this one. I had the opportunity to meet this guy. I went to my first TV show, and I actually haven't made an episode out on it yet, but I'll probably in a couple months, when it's closer to the time it airs, I'll make an episode and let you guys know about it. But yeah, I was there for about 6 days, and I got to meet one of the judges who was on there, and we really hit it off, and I ended up being in his little group one of the days there, and had a great conversation about marketing and branding, and he knows a lot about business. I was like, man, got to get you on the show, and here we are today. So without further ado, Chase, for anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to get to know you, to get to meet you yet, brother, tell us your elevator pitch. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. I'm Chase Curtis. I am the founder of Sway Medical. I was the CEO for the last 5 years and just stepped down about 2 months ago. And Sway is a kind of cool digital product that is essentially using the built-in sensors of any mobile device to do concussion testing for athletes. So really built that business from idea all the way through to profitable business. And it's been fun to kind of track that progress of business growth and development. My personal background is really in digital product design and, growing businesses from idea phase all the way through to generating revenue. So excited to, dive in on the podcast, and it was kind of fun to meet you and dive in.
Yeah, so let's do it, man. That's first things first. Let's hop in a time machine, right? Let's go back some years, right? What was little Chase like growing up? Like, were you always this like entrepreneurial like person? Like, where did this originate from? Like, what was it like growing up for you, man?
Yeah, it's funny because I've spent a lot of time thinking about, what childhood was like. And I kind of had this dual dynamic of absolute killer and played basketball, and like sports were always a thing for me. So that like super competitive, how do I win at all costs? But then balanced by like just an empathic nature of caring about other people. So it's this interesting kind of dichotomy of, wanting to be on the basketball court and just like, win at all cost, I'm coming for you, and then have that balance with like the off the court personality of just empathy and caring about other people. So I think that was kind of the origins of what helped me develop as an entrepreneur, is being able to both go for the win and be competitive and want to be validated in success, but then also having leadership qualities to be able to connect with people and lead them and get them bought into a kind of vision of where we're headed.
Yeah, how long did you play basketball for?
So I played all the way through college. I started originally when I was, 6, 7 years old. My dad was a high school basketball coach, high school football coach. And so started really early on, and then played. I was an All-American in college. So played at a small Division III school, and really had the opportunity to start all 4 years, and, had a fun basketball career. I even played a little bit after college, and then kind of just got to the point where I was never going to play in the NBA or anything like that. So might as well go back to school, figure out what I wanted to do in the post-career time.
Yeah, so let me ask you, like, when you had to, I guess, throw in a towel, right, to stop taking basketball seriously and start entering the real world, I guess you could say, throughout that journey, were you like mainly just focused on sports, or did you always like have like side hustles on the side to try and get you by, or was it just like basketball locked in?
Yeah, no. So I mean, basketball was the main focus, right? Just because I was so ingrained into it. But I actually, with my best friend from high school, we started summer basketball and strength training camps back at home. And so there were these businesses where we would make money in the summertime to be able to pay for like our school year. And so, we built these things up to where we were making pretty significant money over the summers in this like, entrepreneurial fashion. My dad started a construction business, so I could see a little bit about what that was like. His dad had started kind of these sports camps as well. And so we kind of watched our parents get outside of just I'm working a 9-to-5 job. And so my first summer when I came back from basketball in college, my dad was like, "You're going to work the construction site." And so, man, I was doing some crazy shit like, digging drainage ditches and stuff like that. And he gave me the talk. He was like, "Yeah, now that you've done this, I want you to never want to do this again." Right. And my hand would just be blistered. So my sophomore year, when I came back, we're like, all right, we're going to do something smarter this summer. And so we started these camps. We made good money, and that was kind of really the first deep entrepreneurial journey that I went through.
Man, that's amazing, man. I remember for me when I was in school, so I played basketball, football, and then I did my senior year. I was like, "F it, why not?" I only have one more quarter here in school. I did track through javelin um, for once 1 quarter, but man, I was so focused on like sports, and if it wasn't sports, it was video games. That I never really had any time for business at all. And for me, very similar to you, like on the field, on the court, like I am a dog. Like I have like I just want to destroy everyone. When I was that kid, like I don't know if you, I'm pretty sure you were probably this kid as well. Like if it was the NBA finals in my gym class, and if you didn't like it, find another class to go to because like we're here to win. And there's like I remember one time sending a girl to the nurse playing dodgeball, and this is like we don't have like those dodgeball they had back in the day. Back in the day, it was easy to send people to the nurse. Like we have these fluffy like foam balls, so you have to throw it really hard to cause any significant amount of damage to someone. Man, I used to be letting it rip in gym class, taking everybody out. There was no one safe. But for me, it's similar to you. Like my main focus was sports, and my first like I guess like entrepreneurial endeavor actually it was around the same age, but like for different reasons. I never finished my sophomore year of college. I dropped out to get into real estate before the summer. So I was on my third semester, um, and I tried to get into real estate wholesaling. This is the winter break before first and second semester, third and fourth semester. Sorry, my sophomore year, and I ended up paying for the class, got my LLC file, my logo, whatever, and I ended up getting ready to start it. Connecticut's an attorney closing state, and I caught up a couple of attorneys, and none of them knew what they were talking about. One guy was like, "Yeah, John, you can't do that. It's illegal, whatever." Even though it's totally legal, I know a ton of wholesalers now, but and that scrapped up that idea, and then I decided to drop out of college to pursue my real estate license. So around that same time that you kind of had like your entrepreneurial start, I had mine, just a totally different circumstance. I was in the middle of the pandemic, like not knowing what on earth is gonna go on with the world, but like around that same age. So I'm curious. Let me ask you, man. Like, how was it like trying to incorporate the stuff you learned from sports into entrepreneurship? Because like for me, I didn't have like any actual like work experience because I was a student athlete, man. Didn't really have time to get work experience or anything. So like, what was it like for you trying to transition all your sports knowledge that you had and all the lessons you learned from that into like the world of like business?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally different, but they translate kind of across the two pretty easily, right? So in business, you can't just be a killer mentality and go after people, right? I think on the court, you can get into those brawls, you can get into the, kind of back and forth with somebody, and you know that this is, kind of in a contained arena where there's set rules and like expectations. And in the business world, there's this like bleeding over into real life. So if you're an asshole on a basketball court, there's not an expectation that you're an asshole off of it. But in business,
Yeah.
it's like, I think, much closer to like this real world experience. And so you can't be an asshole in business and, have that be the expectation because it's just not. So I think that's a big part of like the lesson I learned through the process of, hey, I can be a killer mentality, but I can do it in a way that is contained within myself, challenge myself, and not have that like outward chaos that is the basketball court. Because I mean, playing sports, I definitely had that outward chaos. Like I can vividly remember losing in a basketball game and just taking like a swing hack at somebody that was obviously clearly me just, hacking at him. And my dad just like snatching me up and being like, hell no, we don't do stuff like that. But you can't do that in the real world. So it's, kind of, I think channeling that competitive nature is a really challenging thing for athletes to get a hold of. I think that's probably the biggest thing I learned, kind of through the difference between, hey, I got to be thoughtful and methodical, and attack this with a very centered interpersonal connection with people, as opposed to just like all out effort. If I just bulldog through people, then I'm going to be successful at it. So I think that's probably the
Yeah.
biggest difference between the two that I found.
Yeah, no, same way. Like so I played my main sport was football though. So it's like in football, like
There you
we could really get away with like going all out and
go.
bulldozing through people. So I trying to channel that into business. It was it was interesting because like I've always been very curious, and like when I get into something, like I just like YouTube everything that I can, and until I understand it, and I watch every video on double speed, and that's kind of always been my thing. So for you, you said you come home on the summers and you do the summer camps, and then that would help pay for the rest of the school for that year for the most part. Um, when did you went from like the summer camps into the business that you just stepped down from?
Yeah, so I kind of ran those summer camps through undergrad. Obviously, that's kind of playing basketball, and then I ended up going to grad school in Kansas.
Okay.
And so, kind of in that process, I learned a lot about concussions. I ran the neuropsychology lab my second year at Wichita State University, and that was kind of like I wasn't doing a ton of entrepreneurial things actively because I was getting my master's and working another job, but I was actively thinking about how do I do the next thing, right? Because I had figured out this hack in college of how to not have to do, work service or whatever the things were during the year while I'm playing basketball. It's like, no, I can go bank 10 to 15,000 in the summer and then I am golden for the rest of the year. And so I think the process of figuring out that next step. So I left grad school in 2008 and then I started my company towards the end of 2010. And really, it was just seeing an opportunity. This was the original iPhones had come out in 2007. And I just figured out that, hey, we could do a lot of this testing we're doing in a lab with the sensors that are in a device on these new mobile phones. And we all take this stuff for granted, right? Like this is in everybody's pocket now. The first iPhones that came out in 2007, that was a novelty. Like you had flip phones before that. You had the, Palm Pilots, BlackBerry type of stuff.
Blackberries, yeah.
But nothing like a smartphone that you have now. That's truly like that, device that can measure things. And so it was that opportunity of just seeing an opening. How do we take this thing and convert it over? That's really launched into that opportunity of building this company.
That's dope. So make a quick pivot because one of the things we talked about,
Yeah.
at least when we were at the blocks that final day, is philosophy. We got real deep into going, back and forth with quotes on that last day we had that conversation. Um, at what point throughout this journey so far did you start getting into like did you start getting like deeper into like quotes and stuff like that um earlier on and just kind of just carried through, or like as you started progressing in your journey it started to become more and more of a habit?
Yeah, I'd say like for the vast majority of the last 10 years or so, it's been very much how do I get better at business? How do I read the business books and have all of that? I don't know. I think it goes back to the basketball side of things of wanting to be like the best, wanting to compete. If we're playing dodgeball, I'm winning dodgeball. Like, I don't care. I'll take your head off if that has to be the case, because that's just who I am in my core is I'm competitive. And so I think part of that is how do you take that competitive nature and pull it into, um, business sense. And I think that was a big transition. And then once I did that and I was able to build a successful company and still not be like happy in who I was, I think that was the thing that really pulled me back to, okay, how do I figure out who Chase is and dig deeper into that versus just, being validated by, hey, I'm successful at this or I'm successful at that. And that goes back to basketball, business. Like I was chasing validation in those external things as opposed to truly diving deep and saying, okay, but what matters to me? Right. And I think that's part of like growing up, childhood experiences. Everybody has traumatic childhood experiences on some varying level, either capital T traumatic, these big events, or lowercase t traumatic of, hey, you didn't get the emotional support you need, or whatever it is. Like nobody grows up without that trauma. And so I think, a lot of times, especially with us and entrepreneurs, is it's put into the need for validation externally from these other things. Like, look how successful I'm being. Look at the straight A's that I've gotten. And so I think that's been a big part of like what got me into, more philosophical quote based things. And there's just something about words that are so beautiful when they string together and just create that enlightenment, that epiphany of like, oh man, I didn't connect those dots until those words just lined it up perfectly for me. That I think is just, central to philosophical thought.
Yeah, no, that's so dope, man. It's one of those things where it's like being able to word something in a way that just makes your brain just like expand and stretch. It's like there's a gift in that. And I think one of those things, bro, I think I might have told you, but for me, like, I kind of got into quotes. It started off with song lyrics for me, not like actual philosophy quotes. I always thought, like, for me, my grandparents, so they only spoke Spanish. So, like, when I was younger, my Spanish wasn't as good as it is now. So, like, I couldn't express myself the way I wanted to. And, like, when you're angry, you already are, like, you're already tripping up on your own words. And then, like, I'm angry now, I got to translate. Like, not only understand what they're saying, then you're, Dominicans speak pretty fast. So, like, this is all happening at high speeds, right? They're yelling at me, and I'm trying to translate it, and then be able to understand it and then translate it back so I could say something back. Man, like after a while, you just shut down. It's like what? It's not even worth trying anymore, right? And that, so that's for me how I started like to really start isolating myself mentally at least. And I was in solitude for a long time mentally, at least when it came to personal stuff. And that's when I started getting into more song lyrics. So now I have like a song quote for like pretty much any situation you can think of. I have some sort of quote, lyric, or something to go alongside with it. And then it kind of evolved, and I'd say I started looking. My first time into like philosophy was my 12th grade English teacher. He used to go on random philosophical tangents, and I told the story a couple of times in the podcast. But um, one day we watched Plato's Allegory of the Cave, and the only quote that stuck with me was, "The duty of the enlightened is to enlighten the unenlightened." And that stuck with me forever. I wasn't an entrepreneur at the time. I didn't have any big grand visions. I had an idea like I wanted to retire early. Like 65 just seemed way too far out for me. But yeah, I heard that quote and like that just stuck. So like, is there any quotes for like that just like really kind of shifted everything for you?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that quote, I think, over the blocks week, and I think it's a fascinating one. It kind of ties back for me to the commencement speech that Steve Jobs gave about connecting the dots, right? And you can only connect the dots looking backward. You can't connect the dots looking forward, which I think is this great analogy of like why he dove into things like typography and these other, um, you know, just learnings that interest him. And I think, taking that a step further beyond just connecting the dots looking back, I think life, entrepreneurship, but mostly life is all about collecting dots, right? How do you get more of these experiences, more of these reference points so that you can connect them? Because if you only have 4 or 5 dots, it's really hard to make them link together into a certain path versus if just try new experiences, you're always saying yes to opportunities early on in life so you can collect these opportunities. I think that's how you kind of grow personally to where you have many more references to look back on. So if I took typography in college, if I did, this business and failed at it, if I tried real estate, if I have all of these different things that I've done in my past, it gives you more reference points to make those connections. And I think that's, again, going back to your quote around enlightening the unenlightened, it's how do you get them more dots so that they can begin to see the link to those? And I think that's where enlightenment comes from is just these experiences being, somebody who is always leaning into experiences as opposed to being hesitant and no, I'm not quite sure. You lose out on those opportunities of growth. Now you got to get to a point where you say no to things as you get older, and you want to be protective of your time, but you're still always reading and gaining experiences.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's one of those things I feel like that's also part of the reason I love podcasting so much. You get to hear so many different people's perspectives and viewpoints, and after a while like you use all these different viewpoints to kind of make sense of the world and like find your own like way in the world. Because one of my favorite quotes, I was talking to one of my friends, this is years ago. We were outside the gym and it's like 10 o'clock at night. We just finished a late night workout session, and he said something about like there's 8 billion people in this world. I mean, there's 8 billion different realities. And that one really hit because when you think about it, it's like we're the center of our world, not the world. And so like even though yes, we are the main character that in our own stories, it's like the overall like over the overarching story, we're just all bystanders in it for the most part. And we're kind of here for borrowed time, and then another character steps up to the play and the story continues, and it's one of those things it's like it really humbles you, and to not think that you understand or that you know everything or that your way is the right way of viewing everything. It's like there is no like what is really right and wrong, and that gets super philosophical then, because then it's like, well, then it stands from religion or morals, or but it's like, well, where does that come from? And it's just this never ending chain of just like you ask why enough time and you realize no one really understands why we actually do anything.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure.
Um,
There's one of my favorite quotes of all time is Anthony DeMello quote, and Anthony DeMello was like a Jesuit priest back in the like 60s and 70s, and his quote is, "We see the world, we see objects and things in the world not as they are, but as we are." Which is this whole concept around like the baggage that we're bringing to any given experience is typically our filter, right? It's not this factual thing that is the real world. It's the truth that we've created behind it. And so I think that's so much of life. Like you said, there's 8 billion people all with their own perspective. They could all look at the exact same thing and have a different truth, even though factually it's only one thing. And I think that's a huge part of it is just stepping back and realizing the things that you see in the world are your filter. They're not everybody else's filter. And that's colored by your experiences, your traumas, your, everything else that make it your view. So I think that's a huge part of the experience overall.
no, 100%. And so like, to tie it back a little bit, right? To bring it back. So like when it comes to business, right? In the simplest way possible, right? Because wisdom is all about simplicity, right? The simplest way possible, like what what makes a good like business person?
I mean, I think a good business person has to be this balance between somebody who has the talent, the skills, the competitive nature, but also is an empathic leader enough that they can step back and be able to lead people. And I think that comes down to being able to build relationships with individuals. So, kind of tying it back to basketball, I had three different basketball coaches really in high school and college. I had my high school basketball coach, I had my club basketball coach, and I had my college basketball coach. Right. And every single one of them took a different approach to leadership. My high school coach was 100% relationship. He was, how do we tie this together and how do we be, kind of collectively friends, as a group. My college basketball coach was just the hard hitting, you know, we're going to do this and I'm going to beat you to the ground until we do it. And it was the threat, the fear that he would bring to it. And then my club basketball coach was the, I'm going to hammer you, but I'm going to build that personal relationship with you to where you get better from that hammer, but you're supported within that relationship. And so it was so interesting to see those different dynamics of leadership playing basketball. And I think you have to be that, that middle ground where you can be, really hard hitting as a leader, but then you've got the relationship where you can do that. If you're just an asshole and you're just hammering people without the underlying relationship, they begin to resent you. And so I
Yeah.
think being successful in business is that combination of being able to build really deep interpersonal relationships with your team, your employees, your business partners, but then also being able to tell them the truth, right? And there's this huge difference between kindness and politeness. Like you can't be polite all the
Yeah.
time and avoid the hard conversations. You've got to be also kind and like sometimes hit people in the mouth when they need it and be willing to be hit in the mouth when you need it, but you have the relationships where you trust people in doing that. So I think that's a big
Yeah.
part of it is just that, ability to develop relationships, but also still be hyper competitive.
No, 100%. I have a similar experience too, because like just looking back at all my coaches, like there's some coaches you hear hit the line, and it's like, man, it's we're in for a long practice. It's gonna be a long day. And there's other coaches who's like, everyone come in, take a knee, and it's like, all right, now we're in for a long speech. But either way, we're in for something that's gonna take forever. But like, one was, they're gonna talk us, and then usually then we have to hit the line. But like, at least we're getting spoken to first, before we get sent into getting tortured and doing suicide forever. But it's like at least we got a good speech that really was heartfelt. And I had so many different coaches going up through the years, and like looking back now, like my middle school coach, they really did it well because they were that perfect balance. There was like three or four of them, and like they almost it was like, how do I define it? They were all like technically coaches, but like they each had their own way of coaching. Because with football, you have your wide receiver coach and you have your defensive back coach, and but it's also middle school football. Not like we were playing like a
Sure.
collegiate level where it's like every position had their set coach, right? And so they kind of really did a great job of having like all the different dynamics of what makes a good leader and like bringing that together. And that, like those are the coaches that you remember for pretty much ever. Like they'll always be ingrained in your memory. And so I wanted to ask that question. It was a setup to ask the next question. Next question: how long did it take you to become that good business person? Like how long did you think it took you in your journey to get to that point? Like what did you have to go through to get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still a question of have I gotten there? And I think we all are asking that question of like, do you continue to grow and get better and better? I think on the coaching side of it, I think there's this big difference between coaching and, even on the business side, mentoring, leading out of fear or out of love, right? And I think the coaches who can create the relationship to where you're getting on the line to run with them and for them, not because you fear that they're going to drop the hammer on you because you don't do what they do or you don't do what they say. Like I think that fear versus love mentality, you get so much more out of the relational based response to love leadership versus fear leadership, where it's like, oh shit, he's going to have me run the stairs. If I don't do this correctly, he's going to throw a chair at me. If I don't, you know what I mean? Like people don't perform well under that type of mentality. But yeah, I mean, I think I progressed quite a bit over the course of just like this one business. It's been a really fun experience to go from founding the company, building it to the first 100,000 in revenue, and then I ended up leaving the company in 2014. So this is not the first time that I've stepped down in the CEO
Yeah.
role, and that experience was I was unprepared to be CEO of a business. Right, I understood product. I could help get it to the MVP stage, but I didn't know how to scale a business from 100,000 to a million or 5 million in revenue. And there was such a learning to go through that process of stepping away from the business the first time. Ultimately, I came back in 2017, 2018. We were able to put a group together to buy the business back out from the existing investors and really kind of relaunch the company. And that's been kind of the success of the business. It hasn't been a 12 or 13-year success run. It's really been kind of an initial 3 or 4 years that were successful to get it to product market fit, 4 years of just kind of me not being there any longer, not really seeing much traction, and then the last 5 years really coming back to the business and saying, okay, here's how we're going to do it differently this time. And I think ultimately what we did way different was I forget who the quote is by. I think it's Reed Hastings or something like that. But culture eats strategy for lunch. And what I really focused in on when I built Sway the second time around was really implementing a culture of who we are as a business. And I think that's what's made all the difference in the initial build of the company, not being able to push through that success, go get a bunch of skills and experience working for businesses in the Bay Area, in the tech scene, and then be able to bring those back to a company that I originally started and say, okay, how can we build an effective culture that's actually going to bring the right people in so we can grow and scale this business? And, a ton of failures throughout that time even, but ultimately, we pushed through to get to kind of a point of success for the business.
Yeah, so if you don't mind, I'm gonna like dive a little deeper into like that little I guess you could say off season, at least off season for your main business, right?
Sure.
At least that first one, right? What was that like? I know for me, like as an entrepreneur, once I got into it, like before it was a little different, but once I got into like business, it's like my brain hasn't really stopped since. And so it's like I'm always thinking of like I feel like I have to do something, which I know isn't the most productive thing, or nor is it the right thing to do, right? But like, what was it like for you stepping away from the thing you worked so hard to get off the ground? Like, what was that like?
Man, it was gutting, to be honest, because I had built it really from the end of 2010. We did our first financing in early 2011. I brought on some investors that great people, but probably weren't the right investors for highly scalable health based tech. They just saw, hey, this is a really interesting business opportunity. Maybe we could get really lucky with the investment and get massive ROI on it. And again, great people, just misalignment on what it was going to take to get to that success point. And so ultimately, we kind of built the business. First 100,000 in revenue, really proven out kind of the product market fit at least early. And then there was a big divide between raising more money to where they would be diluted which was an obvious, for me, we always had to do that because that was the only way to go about growing the business to the point we needed, versus their thought of like, okay, well, let's see what we have. Let's try to sell it. Let's build it as a lifestyle business, which is two totally different pathways. And ultimately, it was my fault. I didn't have alignment of the investors at the time to say, this is what we need to do. This is our process, because I was naive to what that would look like. And so ultimately, they wanted to hire a sales guy. I didn't want to hire that guy. And really, they didn't want to raise capital. And so I had to step back. And I mean, that was probably the most difficult decision I've ever made, was stepping away from the company that I had founded. And knowing that the right path was this other direction, but not having the resources and control, et cetera, to be able to kind of grow it from that point. And, hardest decision I ever made, but also the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because it gave me the experience to be able to go out, work for other businesses, see how they build out sales teams, understand all these things that I was, kind of naive to as a 26-year-old founder, 27-year-old founder, where I didn't have that experience. And ultimately, that really helped that time period to be able to come back, take the company over, and make it successful from that point.
Yeah. So I want to know, like, I want you to speak on that for a little bit, because you're
Yep.
26, right? I'm 22, right? Or at least at that time you were 26, right?
Mm-hmm.
And right now I'm currently 22, and at least with this, I only started teaching. I got into business, I guess you could say, like 2-ish, 3 years ago, if you count real estate as my business, whatever. So 3 years ago, and it's like one thing I heard not too long ago. It's like you can't expect to like get into business and just kill it when there's people who have been in the game 20, 30, 40 years already, who are you're in direct competition with. Like, that's not putting respect on the game. And I want to talk about that, like, for all the like people who are new to business, and just like, not to say you don't have not to say you can't have big dreams or ambitions, but like, I want you to talk about, like, if you can, just putting respect on the game of business and how hard it actually is, and how much, especially if you are like a solo founder, right? A solopreneur, and you have to wear all the hats, like how hard it actually is trying to get a business off the ground and be successful.
Yeah, it's an incredible challenge. I mean, I think being 22 and like the investment that you've been able to make into yourself at this point, you're light years ahead of where I was at 22. And I think when you're my age, 40, and you look back at 22-year-olds, you're going to say the same thing. You're like, man, how did you guys get so far advanced compared to me? I think there's just this natural availability of resources, of people investing and learning from those that came before them. And so I think a lot of it, though, is also as you get older, investing back into people, right? Like I
Yeah.
spent a week working with people who came to the blocks to learn, how do I get better at business? And it's like, yes, I want to invest my time in those people so they can grow and get better, right? So you at 22, me at 22, light years of difference, which is great, because by the time you're 40, you're going to be so much better than I am at the journey, as long as you continue to take those risks and take those challenges. And I think you can't learn things any other way than failing yourself, right? You can put all of these theoretical boxes in place. You can go get your MBA. You can watch YouTube channels. You can invest in everything you possibly can, which is great. And you should absolutely do that. But the only time you learn the really, really difficult lessons is by trying and failing, right? And there's absolutely not a single entrepreneur on the planet that has ever not failed, because that's the only way that you learn and grow. And they can be small micro failures, or they can be big, catastrophic, massive failures. And you learn from those, in very different ways. And so I think that's part of the process and part of the journey, is just you have to go through and fail, 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 succeed. And it's those success points that drive you forward, because it's like, oh, I finally figured things out on how to weave this together. And that's the nature of entrepreneurship in business founding and business operating, is typically it's never been done before. You can look at something that looks similar, but if it had been done before, then there wouldn't be an opportunity. And so that's where I think, as you grow into your entrepreneurial journey, you've got to take those challenges and, try to use all the knowledge that you have to weave the best possible pathway. And that's looking at people and having mentors who are people who have done it and failed at it. And you can analyze their situation and say, hey, let me add dots to my overall experience list just based on the stories that I'm hearing. But you can't really collect those dots and solidify them in any other way than playing in the game and failing, right? Like you were a failure in football a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I was a failure in basketball a lot of the time, but I'll tell you what, there's
Yeah.
those moments where I found success and, I hit 10 3-pointers in a game and we won a championship. And so it takes all the failures though to compound to get to those successes.
No, 100%. And that's one of those things that's like, man, it sure does suck. Like failing. Like, it sure does suck. And even with business, like a lot of the times, at least at the stage that I'm currently at, and even like probably at the stage you're at as well, it just sucks in different ways, right? Like you're not complaining about trying to find a client, you're now complaining about, well, what do I do next type of thing? Like it's just, but nevertheless, it's like other problems that we have to deal with. And the more we grow, this is just kind of like growing pains. And I want to share like one of my biggest um I guess like I'm normally like a super positive, like super optimistic guy, but man, my most recent launch I had back in January, I wanted to do a 100K launch, right? That was the big goal. Like I was trying to kill it, and in terms of the numbers, I reverse engineered them, and I actually had a pretty solid chance of making it possible. First day, so I did a 4-day workshop. Days 1, 2, and 3, I taught for an hour, and then like I had like a VIP session for another hour. Day 4 comes, I had a special guest, right? Big guest. She comes on, do a little interview, and then I get into it, and then I do my pitch, right? No one buys on day 1. Man, I never felt so depressed in my life. Like, because like I was banking on it's different when there's stakes on the line. If I was just trying to make 100K just to make an extra 100K, it's different. But like, man, that would have helped me like get out of debt. That would have helped me get me out of this hole that I'm in, and that would have helped out. And there was so much at on the line, and just to completely bomb it, man, that was probably like for 2 days. I genuinely like I never felt like less of a man. I never felt like less of like all confidence was just out the window. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to leave my room. I just wanted to close my door, shut the lights off, and like just I don't know, man. That's probably the worst I've ever felt in a long time. I haven't probably felt that way since like my last football game, man. Like that was probably the worst feeling. So I say that to say like I want to ask you like what was like in recent years at least like your lowest point like at least like in business specifically because like that for me man like man, just thinking back on it just like yeah I was betting on so much for that and it's like well by Wednesday I was like all right let me put my big boy pants on this is what I signed up for I'm an entrepreneur like let me look at the film where did I go wrong but like man those 2 days felt like eternity it just like a never ending like bro I suck and it was like a big reminder like I suck at business and like I got work to do but as I said it feels good when you succeed but in those moments when it gets slow man it sure does suck.
Well, and I think that's part of the growth, right? You don't grow from experiences where you hit a single, a double, a triple, or a home run. You only grow from those experiences where you strike out and strike out massively, right? And I think
Yeah, strike
so.
out
Back,
bottom of the ninth, we're down 3 and like bases loaded and I just strike out game over. I
yeah.
fumbled that.
But yeah, so I'd say like the biggest professional challenge. So we, as a business, really kind of have focused in on a few different markets. We raised a kind of a, late seed, early Series A round in 2020 to really kind of grow the business. And we have a core business that is kind of concussion testing in athletes. And, we've got over 3,000 organizations that use the product. It's wasn't profitable at the time. We've grown it tremendously since that time, but clear product market fit. Part of our fundraise was, okay, let's go try these other business models too to see where their growth opportunities are. And, can we test in Alzheimer's and dementia? Can we test in physical therapy? Can we test in workforce readiness? And ultimately through the process, I was way too disorganized in trying to test all of these different markets over that time period. And what it did was really cause this distraction of growing the core business. And so I had my two kind of highest level management team members who are now our CEO and our CTO ultimately like sit me down and say, hey, get your shit together. We can't keep going after these different, test cases. Like, no, we're calling you out right now that you're not doing your job effectively as you need to. And so this is like the intervention. And man, like that's not that long ago. That's like a year and a half, 2 years ago. And so it's even through the process now that you have to have those people that can really hold you accountable to, focusing you in. And man, I'll tell you, it did not feel good to have your two top people say, hey, you're not doing your job effectively in this role. And so, you go through that same pity party of like, hey, I appreciate the feedback, but then ultimately you like retreat back and go, oh, I'm terrible. What am I doing? I don't even know where I'm at. Like, why am I even doing this? But it's those moments that shift the trajectory going forward, right? And it's kindness versus politeness. They could have just sat there the whole time and been like, all right, this is the direction we're going, and let's try to just get on board as much as we can. And instead, they took the kind path with really harsh feedback that needed to be said, and ultimately, that's what shifted our business to really being a success. And we've kind of doubled in size the last 2 years. We've gotten to the point where we are really able to focus in on the core concussion business and accelerate it. But I think it's being open to that type of feedback. It's the Kobe Bryant kind of mentality around, I hate losing and I love winning, but it's not about that. It's about the journey of like truly investing in the day to day. And I think a lot of times as like visionary CEOs, we get over our skis with, oh yeah, here's the vision that we see, but not painting it for the team and creating kind of the step-by-step process we have to go through. So I think that's really important just in the journey of knowing you're going to fall on your face, you're going to fail. But I had such good relationships with all of the people on my team that they could say like, yeah, you're human too. Like you didn't handle this one the best way you possibly could, but let's kind of regroup, calibrate, and shift the business going forward. And we did in a really successful way.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And you mentioned too, like the people that came to you, they one to even have like the confidence and the comfortability to know that they could approach you in that manner. A lot of times, or you said back to the fear thing, like leading with fear. If you had
Yeah.
done that, they would have never came up to you in the first place, and then you probably would have been in a very different position than you're in now, right? And so, fast forward a bit, you said they're the current CTO and CEO now. What was it like stepping down this time versus last time?
Yeah, so this time was totally different. I think the only reason that I stepped down out of the role was because I knew the leadership that was there would be better than my leadership in the current moment, right? And so we had a business that very much was focusing on this concussion business. Petty, who is our CEO now, he actually joined the company as a front end developer 3 years ago. So it's like entry level position. He 30 years old, but like is just somebody who is just sponging everything up, just as one of those natural leaders that when you throw him into a group of people, people are going to very quickly start looking to him on, hey, what's the answer? How do we move this forward? And so he just very quickly accelerated through the business from front end developer to director of product to VP of product to VP of ops to COO to CEO. Right. And so, I wrote this, I started writing at his kind of push, like you need to start writing all the things you've learned through this journey. So the first blog post that I did was really this transition from CEO. And the whole blog post is really about a Dave Chappelle quote, which is like, you have to be, the biggest dream in the room wins. And you have to be, the second part of it is you have to be humble enough to recognize when you're in somebody else's dream. And I think for me, I was going through some kind of personal challenges and things like that, but to recognize that his ascent from front end developer to COO and being really successful at that, that I was starting to live in his dream. And I needed to enable that and be humble enough to know like, hey, this is the best thing going forward for the business is let him take that leadership mantle, give him the full autonomy to be able to get the team behind him and push forward. And so I think that was like the core of it was really recognizing that number one, I needed a break. I had been running at breakneck pace for 5 years to get the business to where it was. And you have somebody here that's ready to step in and, take the mantle and run with it. And I didn't have an ego where it was like, I can't hand this off or it won't be mine. And, really, really, really interesting part of that, the first person I told that I was thinking about stepping down from my role was my 14-year-old daughter. And, her initial response was, Dad, you can't do that. You have to get credit for this, right? It's your business. You can't not be CEO. So we had this really kind of deep conversation around there's a big difference between being CEO and being founder, right? I'll always be founder of the company, but also at some point you have to do really what's best for the company, the people that are there. And the best thing that I could possibly do is hand that off to somebody who is ready to go after it and then enable them and help that transition occur. And so it was a really fun moment to be able to teach her about enabling other people's dreams and helping build those stepping stones for them to find success in their own world. And I've truly found through that experience that it's something that really matters to me is building that platform for them to be successful.
Yeah, I think then that alone has so many lessons in there, like the humility, the personal awareness, man. To the it reminds me too, especially with what you were saying towards the end there, of that whole little like old saying about planting seeds for trees whose shadows you'll never get to sit under and enjoy, type of thing. And it's like that's exactly what you're doing right now. It's like that seed that you're planting, he's going to take the business the stratosphere somewhere you probably may have never been reached, and you may not be a part of the journey when it does get there, but it's like you set it up for him so that he could get there, and it's like and enjoy that. And you may never get to enjoy that, that shade, but it's like you don't do it with that intention. You do it so that someone else can enjoy it. It's very, very selfless. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. um
Yeah.
Very, very selfless way to live, man. And so, and Chase, man, we've been going. I feel like I could talk to you forever, man. Sheesh, where can we catch up with you, man? Where can we find out more about what you have going on? And you said you have a blog as well. Where can we keep up with your journey in this next phase of life that you're about to start entering?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Substack. That's where my blog's based. So just at Chase Curtis. You can find me on Instagram, although I'm not super active, but trying to be more active as I get more writing in. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to find on those platforms. I'd say Substack is the best. I'm working on, publishing that content hopefully weekly and diving into all the deep stuff. Things from building company culture to dealing with personal depression and challenges that go on through life. And quotes are a big part of it too. So excited to bring some of these elements in there, and I'm sure we'll chat again on it.
100%, man. We're definitely gonna have to have you back on, man. But now it's time for our famous 5 questions. Same 5 questions I ask every single guest. Question
All
number
right.
one is, what is the most impactful lesson you've learned in life?
Oh man, I think perseverance. I think it is, to continue to get up over and over and over again and not accept failure as defeat.
What is the most admirable trait a person can have?
I think the most admirable trait is enabling other people's dreams. I think it is being a light to other people and helping create that platform for them to be successful. It's the planting the seeds and not seeing the tree, but knowing that the investment in that ultimately will make the world a better place because you chose to give back to other people as opposed to take into yourself.
If you had to change someone's life, but you only had one book to give them, which book would you recommend?
Ooh, that's a tough one, man. There's so many that are at the top of my list, but I think probably the most impactful for me is probably Humble the Poet, How to Be Loved.
Okay, that's a different one. I haven't heard that one before.
It's a
Um,
great one. It's just all about like personal self discovery, what self love means, what love means to other people.
yeah,
Man, and he is one of those, I think, like current age philosophical minds that if you haven't read it, it's a good one.
yeah, okay. What is the legacy that you're working on leaving behind?
I think the legacy that I'm working on is the legacy for my kids, which is a lead by example and be able to create a world for them that is not built on trying to survive their experiences, especially the negative ones. There's a great quote from a marriage counselor named Terry Real, which is, generational trauma rolls through the woods like a wildfire, essentially is the concept of it, until one person chooses to stand up against that. and you
Yeah.
spare the ones that have come before you and the ones that are still to come. And so I think for me, it's like trying to create that better experience for my kids so they don't deal with everything that my parents did and their parents did and their parents did. I think that's a huge thing for me, is just trying to give them a better life in terms of emotional, not necessarily financial.
And final question, for anyone that wants to embark on their walk to wealth today, what is the first step you recommend they take?
I think you've got to invest in yourself. I think it is gathering those experiences and learning and investing in that side of it. I think it's all about connecting the dots. And again, there's a lot of random, hard to connect dots looking forward, but looking back, you can really see how they connect. I think the more of those dots that you're able to collect, those more of those life experiences, the better opportunity you are going to be able to grow and learn who you are as a person so that you can invest in the right business pathways, the right partnerships, building the right culture in your company. So I think that's the biggest thing, is if things interest you, dive deep into them and gain that experience as best you can.
100% Chase, man. It's been a pleasure and an honor having you here today. Thanks again for hopping on, man. And that's all for the episode.
Awesome.